I don't like the way white people treat us. I feel like white people treat us like dogs. And I'm like, have you seen the way white people treat dogs?
So what you just saw was a 12-second clip of the Kill Tony podcast show, video show, which is a stand-up comedy live taping. And the goal for us for this project was to see if our face detection software that we've built was able to pick out the correct subject in a live audience, right? Where the audience is actually sitting behind the comedian who's telling the joke. You know, the biggest face approach focused in on the dude with the straw hat, who is an audience member in the background. And on the right, we have the final version, which plays, you know, pretty static on the actual subject. So I wanted to kind of walk you through how we thought about this problem, because it was very interesting and it wasn't very obvious. And it's really not the fix that's the most interesting part of this. It's really, there are 3 rules that we had to kind of figure out here. And then one kind of rule broke the other one, right? And so in this video, I'd like to kind of get into how we fix that. One of the issues that we ran into was, you know, as these were kind of rendering out, we started to realize that the subjects weren't being properly centered in the frame. We have this node called extract clip. It's part of the node library over here. And what this node does is it cuts a time range out of a long audio or video file. And so you can give it some inputs, obviously a piece of media and a range, which is just a timestamp for it to kind of find the viral moment, right? Or in this case, find the viral moment, but you can really use this for any type of arbitrary extraction. And so it was properly finding the viral moment, but the problem again was the subject was not centered in the frame. And we started to kind of look into this problem a bit and realized, well, we do have a reframe setting here and we have a few options. The first one we started off with was a very naive kind of centered approach. And what that kind of ended up looking like was something like this, where, you know, this is a clip from the Modern Wisdom podcast where the host, you know, is kind of off frame. If you've ever seen this podcast, the host Chris here sits off frame to the left. And so if you just center the frame, like he's not there, right? He's kind of pushed off to the left. And so that was problem number one. That was a pretty easy fix. It's like, okay, we'll just find the subject in the frame, draw a bounding box around it, and then around him, and then, you know, you can get the coordinates and crop the image based off of those coordinates. Now, the problem then became, okay, this worked for a kind of interview style podcast, but when you start to get into a clip with, you know, multiple subjects, how do you then do that, right? Who do you crop on? And so the original idea was, okay, well, we can find the largest face, right, in the, you know, sea of faces. And you can kind of naively assume that the subject that you're interested in is probably the one closest to camera. But that's, you know, that's obviously a naive approach. And, you know, in some cases is probably just wrong flat out. You might want to actually distinguish between someone who's closest to camera as opposed to someone who's further back, and you might want to crop on the further back one. So in this case in particular, you know, we're looking at this Kill Tony stand-up podcast video kind of format show. And, you know, in this case, the person with the biggest face is not the subject. And you see the subject is kind of turning left here, therefore the bounding box gets smaller. And in this case, it actually grabbed this dude here in the straw hat, right? Who has, in this scenario, a larger face. And so that didn't work as well. And so the way we kind of fixed that was a third rule. And so this is the part that I kind of enjoyed working through. And the idea is you stop ranking by size and you rank by 3 things instead. How in focus the face is, how bright the torso is, and how high in the frame the head sits. That combination sounds pretty arbitrary until you see what each one is doing. The crowd foreground head sits lower, so the height throws them out. A performer in this case stands in stage light and an audience is in the dark, right? So brightness matters here. And so there was a few different criteria here where, focus being another one that is kind of worth pausing on. The obvious instinct here is that you want depth, right? You want to know, who is nearer to camera, but that depth is exactly backwards, right? A depth map would rank the foreground audience member above the performer every single time. And the lens really has already answered the question for us in this case. Because the subject is really the focal plane and the crowd is not, you don't need really any type of depth model in this case. And so really none of this is a model call. By the way, this is all using UNet, which I believe is out of the OpenCV zoo, and it's Apache license, so it's all open source. And we just run this on, a standard Linux machine in Amazon Web Services. And so about, 15 milliseconds it takes to kind of render a shot like this. It's very fast, or do this processing, I should say. There's really no network needed, no token cost, and you get a pretty consistent answer every single time. So I wanted to talk about this because it shows you kind of the customization that you need, I think, on a per clip basis or a per show basis. There are very strict rules that we had to kind of follow to get this result. And so, obviously, sometimes this ranking is not enough, and you do kind of have to ask the model which person this shot is about. And that's where, some of the computer vision models do a bit better. And so one rule we kind of figured out here is like, anyone that wants to do this going forward, do not ask the vision model for a coordinate. It will give you one. It will sound confident in its answer, and it will kind of move 5 to 10% of the frame with, between that identical run, right? So it's very inconsistent. What is generally good though, what a standard kind of vision model is generally good at is picking kind of one option out of a short list, right? So you draw a box around each candidate, you then give each box a color, and you kind of ask, which color it answers green, let's say in this case, and, green is the exact because you kind of drew that green. So it's pretty much the whole thing, deterministic, where it has to be exact, and really, out of a model only where there's kind of genuine judgment. And, the part I really didn't expect going in was that there's really no single rule, right? None of this works on all footage. A centered crop breaks on a studio interview, biggest faced fixes that, one essentially completely still loses on a live stage. And so you kind of need all three, right? You need to know which one to use, which weapon to unsheath at the right time. And by the way, this is Treza. This is a node editor for generative media that we're building. Everything that I just showed you essentially was one node on a canvas, but you can go much deeper than that. And if you want to check it out, there's a link below. Cheers.